Well, I'm sure it dates back to my childhood. My mother was always very keen on education, as was my father. They both were great readers and believed strongly in the freedom of information and the importance of reading.
And was there talk about actual free speech, or was there talk about banned in Boston or any of those kind of things?
Absolutely. When I was a child, I was of the era of Peyton Place and a lot of talk about Banned in Boston and Ulysses, Lady Chatterley's Lover, access to information. So all that was swirling around, and of course, as a young person, I wanted to have access to all of it. And what to do about it? Well, you get involved.
So after living at home, of course, you went to college. Was there any experience in college that made you feel more strongly about free speech and First Amendment rights?
It all came together, actually. When I was taking a Milton class, I was very engaged in thinking about free speech issues as I was growing up, off and on, as kids will. But when I got to college and took this Milton course and read the Areopagitica, it kind of really came together, and the importance of it in terms of a free society and making sure that librarians and booksellers were kind of gatekeepers, but more than gatekeepers, advocates of free speech and advocates of the reader in the long run. Very, very important work.
If you had to pick a moment when you thought that you might go on to be a bookseller, would it revolve around that class?
Didn't around, it didn't revolve around that class. It actually revolved around waking up one morning, staring at the ceiling and saying, "You idiot, don't you know you've been doing what you love all these years? Why don't you just get on with it?" I'd been working in bookstores and libraries to help pay the tuition bills, planning to be an academic, and found my calling as a bookseller. It was just as simple as that.
Wasn't it a lawsuit challenging a display ban on books that are, quote, harmful to minors, quote? Why was there a problem with that? And your business at the time was only a couple of years old. Did you worry about publicity? Did you worry about bad publicity? Did anyone complain?
It felt to me when I came to own the Tattered Cover in 1974 that it wasn't long thereafter. I can't remember the exact years, frankly, but it was a time of a lot of attention to harmful to minors legislation. A number of bills came up. We used to go testify at various hearings, committee hearings in the state of Colorado, as advocates of the First Amendment and the impact such legislation would have on booksellers, and the librarians were there. We had a friend in the legislature who used to let us know periodically when these things came up. Often they came up very quickly and were tried to be zipped through. But in fact, we were always able to at least offer our own opinions about the import of protecting the First Amendment rights of our readers. And for the most part, it was killed in committee. There were times, however, where it went farther, and it would crop up. I can't remember exactly how many years apart, but I certainly recall when you came on board with us to work on a particular case, and I think it was the district court or Supreme Court, and it was Supreme Court in that case. And it was certainly one at that time that was got some national attention, actually, too, because Judy Blume came to testify, and Tony Schulte from Random House, and these are people who live the First Amendment in their work as well, and recognize its importance and conveyed their important opinions about how the responsibility should be taken with great weight by the courts to protect the reader's rights. So it was minors' bills. It was occasionally stronger than that and covered adult material. And every single time, I think I wondered, is this going to be the one time when our customers are not going to understand? And the fact that we are protecting their rights as readers, and that they're going to stay away in droves and we're going to go out of business.
Did you worry about bad publicity?
I did worry about bad publicity, and fortunately, our customers understood completely, for the most part. There, of course, were others who felt that we were taking the wrong tack in our fights. But by far, the readers that we serve in this community certainly understood, and to today even will stop me in the store or on the street and offer their thanks. And I think that should be taken by you as thanks to you too, Dan, and to the booksellers, who authors and publishers who have stood behind us on all of this.
Right, it's been quite a community.
Yeah. Yes, it was a difficult time, that's for sure. And I think it came about as a result of Ted Bundy, who was a serial murderer who was found guilty of several murders and who was sentenced to die in the electric chair, who in fact did. But prior to that closure, he said essentially, pornography made me do it. And he used his own words, that's my translation. But that was taken up as a theme moving forward to try to strengthen the laws of obscenity. Ted Bundy's action was such where it was taken up by individuals who felt that people who had, women in particular, who had been sexually abused or harmed in some way, should have more compensation than the perpetrator being sentenced to some degree of incarceration or death. It was felt that there should be restitution that went beyond that. And that's what gave rise to this legislation, which started with Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, was presented, and subsequently Strom Thurmond indeed was on the Judiciary Committee when I went to testify on behalf of, again, of the readers. Judith Krug, as head of the Freedom to Read Foundation of the American Library Association, was there as well to testify against the legislation. And we gave our points of view. Senator Biden was actually the chair of that committee. And it went through a number of different iterations, very complicated. People, of course, are absolutely in support of victims of such heinous crimes. At the same time, we must be very careful about the rights of the reader and the First Amendment and what that means to our governmental system in the long run. And that's what we were trying to put forward.
And might you tell us just a little snippet about the confrontation with Senator Thurmond?
Well, Senator Thurmond essentially said in regard to pornography, obscenity, he knows it when he sees it, but there were many other folks who would counter that by saying it was very difficult to define reasonably. Well, we are advocates for our readers. That is an important part of our jobs. Certainly we're here to sell books, of course. We're here to give suggestions. But in addition to that, we have a great responsibility to make information, books in our case, available to the readers who want them. It is their choice to buy or not to buy. We do not make those choices for our customers. Certainly, every store has its right to present its own way of doing business to its community, to its marketplace. That is for sure. However, that said, there's also a responsibility to make books available to the full marketplace of readers who want information that may be just to test their own opinions about something. I hope not everybody just reads what they're in agreement with. They want to know what the other side is thinking. So just because you may disagree with something doesn't mean it should be banned. And in our governmental system, it's important to be able to have access to all kinds of thinking, because the thoughts don't go away, do they? It's a matter of being able to be a constructive critic and move our society forward in a way that is welcoming to ideas of all kinds, and then we pull from that experiences that form a great society.
I've heard you speak many times eloquently about the marketplace of ideas. Is that what you're talking about?
We, as booksellers, have as part of our jobs taking care of the marketplace of ideas to make it available, continue to make it available to the readers that we serve. It's important.
So let's just use an example. You sell, if someone wants it, books on making methamphetamine. That doesn't mean you support the making of methamphetamine. Explain to us the philosophy behind why you would sell that book.
Well, again, we don't know what the purpose is of the individual who's buying any book. If you buy a mystery book, a person buys a mystery book and goes out and commits a crime relative to what they've read in the book, is it the book that is a criminal as well as the perpetrator of the crime? It's what you do with the information. You might be a reporter who needs to know how something is done in a way that might be anathema to another reader. You might be an individual who is studying to create an academic work. You might be an evildoer. The marketplace of ideas that we support as booksellers is not without risks to a free society. I recall, in fact, the lawyer who was on the opposing side of our argument in the search warrant case, when he mentioned the fact that he was the lawyer for the jurisdiction where the Columbine tragedy happened for the county. And he said people accused the school and the authorities, or they should have known, we should have done this, we should have done that. But the fact of the matter is that in a free society, those risks are there, and we make a decision as to what outweighs the good that outweighs the bad, and we make our decisions in moving forward in the marketplace of ideas and making those decisions for ourselves. I think my first response to that would be, I don't go seeking trouble; it finds us. So we're not going to be kicking around anybody anyway. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to read some more. That's for sure. And beside that, of course, play with my grandchildren and be here for the store as much as they may need me to be available to them and the community.
You tell us about that,
Absolutely.
please.
And Dan, you were really involved in all of this from the very beginning. First of all, as I'm sure you'll recall, the authorities came with a subpoena, and of course, what do I know about subpoenas? And maybe I should have known because, and question it because it was spelled Subpena.
Right.
However, spelling isn't my long suit, you know. I did look it up, and the way they spelled it was the second dictionary okay on it. But anyway, to cut to the chase here, I had called you about it, and you said it was an administrative subpoena and not enforceable, and that you would take care of the contact information that was given to us and call the person in Adams County here in the suburbs of Denver. And you did so. You told them, I believe. Well, why don't you tell the story?
Well, I did talk to them, and I told them we weren't going to comply with any non-enforceable subpoena, and that they shouldn't be doing this anyway. But if they served us with a real subpoena, we would fight it in court and have a hearing about it, and that would be the appropriate way of trying to resolve this issue of whether you had to comply with it or not.
Right, right. And then you told me, and I said, shh.
Right.
And that's the end of that. Only, of course, it wasn't. And a few weeks later, I believe you received a call from Adams County and regarding a search warrant. And that call informed us that they were, the authorities were looking to seek a search warrant to come to the tattered cover and find out what they wanted to know.
Right, with an actual search warrant.
Right, which is immediately actionable.
Exactly right.
No way to go to a court hearing for that one, which was very distressing, of course. And I believe you asked for some time to talk to your client, and they said, okay, the end of the next business day, we would like to get together on the phone and see what we can come up with. And all right, well, the next day came, and you and I had decided to make contact on the phone before the deadline. And I was in my office working away when our store manager came to me and said, Joyce, there are 5 or 6 police officers here with a search warrant. What should I do? And I said something like, well, that's impossible, knowing that we weren't at the deadline yet. And she said, well, they're here. So I said, well, invite them in, and we'll sit in my office and see what's going on here. Well, they had a search warrant, indeed, and the first thing I did, of course, was to call you. And my recollection is you really hit the ceiling.
Oh, I hit the roof. I was so angry because it was an explicit violation of the agreement that we had with the district attorney's office. What ended up happening is these police went around the backs of the district attorney to another district attorney's office, the Denver DA.
Right, and I guess because of that, they could do that because our store is located in Denver, and so
Right.
the jurisdiction was appropriate,
Right.
even if their action was not appropriate. So you negotiated and negotiated. I tried my best, but thankfully, good lawyers are really wonderful to have at your elbow. It was great to work with you on this case. It was just so time-consuming, so all-consuming, really. It turned into a national case, and the press was all over it. And my view is, I got into this business because I love books, and I want to serve the public and the readers, and what are we doing but fighting court cases on the First Amendment, which of course is a part of our job.
Absolutely, or you've certainly made it an important part of your job as an independent bookseller.
Yeah. So we moved forward. You, with your great abilities to sway them, got some time and asked for, I don't know, maybe a week or 10 days to try to come up with another alternative.
The police were convinced by the district attorney not to execute that search warrant. They could have. There was nothing prohibiting them from it. I mean, they had a search warrant, and normally search warrants get executed whether you want them to or not. But not to any credit of the police, but to the credit of the DA, they agreed with me that we would have a hearing about this instead of them executing the search warrant at your store. And frankly, I told them, I can remember the phrase I used. I said, if you force this, you're going to have egg all over your face, and you don't want that. So let's have a hearing and do it the right way. And eventually they agreed.
Right. So indeed, we got the restraining order. We then went to got heard in the district court.
Right.
And it was probably a year down the road at that point, roughly. Constantly working on this case, just amazing. And you brought in pro bono help, and
Right.
and we had folks from the Booksellers Association, from the Publishers Association, from authors groups. It was amazing the support we had through all of this, and it was essential because it turned into a really major national case.
It really did. It really did. I mean, as you said, the national press picked up on it wholeheartedly. There were articles in the New York Times and throughout the mainstream media.
Right, right. And we got half a loaf from that judge. He ruled that indeed I didn't have to turn over all the records that we had on this particular customer in terms of the book purchases they made. However, he did rule that I had to turn over one record that was in particular what the police were looking for. Or so they said. They said just one record,
Right.
one record. And I said to them in my office from the beginning, I asked them, and I recall this so clearly, that what happens if it's not what you think it is? And the officer said, well, we'll just go the next step then, which I interpreted to mean the search warrant would be fulfilled and that they would get all of what they wanted regarding this customer's purchases.
So at this point, we're in the district court, like you said, and it's a year down the road from when you refused to give them the information. Had they gotten the information at that point?
No.
Right. They hadn't. So, I mean, this whole litigation is going on with law enforcement, I think, believing that you were covering up for this alleged drug fellow, and that if you were forced to give the information, it would help them with their case, right?
I want to make it clear, though, that we are not fans of the illegal manufacture of methamphetamines, which was what this case was all about. We know the police have a tough job in many ways, and support them in their good work. But they must follow the due process that's important to our civil liberties as citizens of our communities in this nation, and that's really, really important. And that's what we were fighting for in the beginning and throughout this whole difficult process. So we came to the end of the first hurdle in terms of the courts, and we got half a loaf, and then we decided to go forward to the Colorado Supreme Court, and that was an amazing experience.
Well, now let me stop you. Can you talk a little bit about how that decision got made? Because that was your decision, as you'll recall.
Well, you tell it then.
Quickly, I will, because it was very poignant. You were surrounded by a dozen First Amendment experts. We had a big telephone conference, and we had experts from all over the country, every one of which, including me, was advising you not to appeal because there was no precedent for this, and we would probably lose and create bad law. And you, the only non-lawyer, took a really righteous position and said, no, I really want to appeal this because it's just not right. We shouldn't have to turn this information over. And it was at your wishes and against the advice of all of us lawyers that we proceeded to the Supreme Court.
There was one more important thing in that meeting, though, and that is what you said and Chris Finan said from the American Booksellers Foundation for Free Expression, which has been so important in our bookselling lives. You said, but whatever you decide, we're behind you.
And we were.
And you were. And without you, it wouldn't have happened. Absolutely not. And it was thanks to your good work and the passion that you bring to these issues, and so important with the First Amendment, that made it all happen, Dan. So I thank you very, 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 very much.
Do you remember the argument in front of the Supreme Court, the oral argument?
I do.
In the high school it was
it was very interesting and so appropriate. The Colorado Supreme Court, twice a year in that period, would take interesting questions that they were dealing with to high school in Colorado, and the attorneys would argue the case before the students instead of in the Supreme Court.
Right.
And it was so fascinating, and the students were so geared up for it. They just were totally into it. And they had their social studies classes, and they did their own court case, I think, in class, and came out with their own decisions, and then they watched what you were doing.
It was really something. Remember the whole Supreme Court was set up on their auditorium stage.
Yep.
And then there were, I don't know how many students were watching, 1,000 or, a
Yeah.
lot of students.
Yeah, absolutely. It was marvelous.
It was.
Just marvelous.
So do you remember when we read the decision?
I do, in my office, and
Right.
we were huddled over the computer screen because they were now able to send it out technologically,
Right.
the decision, and my daughter was there, and my colleagues, Kathy and many others, and you, and it was, the tension could be cut with the tension was enormous.
It was. And what was the decision?
The decision was, we won, 6-0, one abstention.
Right. Opinion authored by then Chief Justice Michael Bender.
Yes, Michael Bender, and he wrote such a well-stated opinion. It was readable for the layperson. It was about 50 pages long, and so incredibly good and thoughtful and intelligent, just so marvelous.
And for booksellers, what has been the consequence of that very Supreme Court decision?
Well,
Have you heard of other search warrants or hearings, or has this worked smoothly to the extent you know?
Well, midway through our journey with this case, the Patriot Act came along, and we thought it was going to supersede everything that we had done so far, and we were in big trouble. Turned out not to be the case, and there continues to be more and more talk, even in recent years, about the elimination of some of the stipulations in that act that affect booksellers.
Right. So the decision has held all these years.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It did take up a lot of time, and we've been involved in a lot of First Amendment cases over many years, but this one really, really consumed us. Of course I worried about business, but I recall one gentleman sending me a note, and he said, I don't have no truck with methamphetamine labs, but this is a First Amendment case, and that's exactly how we thought about it. So, yes, we had some people who found that it was not something they wanted to support our position on it. But more than that, by far, who supported our decision to fight this.
Now we're 2+ years after they come to execute the search warrant. They still don't know what the person was buying, because you never gave up that information. What was the answer? If they had executed the search warrant, what would they have found out?
Well, what was amazing was that there was a panel created at the Denver Press Club that we participated in, as did the other side on this. And they wanted to have an exchange of information about it. As it so happened, because the authorities had plenty of information to put the manufacturer of the methamphetamine in jail. He had been put in jail for 10 years, as I recall. And then he had a public defender
Right.
who I think made a call to you,
Right.
who wanted to know what indeed was sold that the police were wanting to get the information about, what purchase this fellow had made, because they truly believed that it was a book on how to make methamphetamines. And the panel kind of went back and forth about this. I guess why don't you tell the story about the public defender who made the call to you and what he said?
Well, he did make the call to me, and he said he had authority from his client, which is what was necessary for us to disclose the information to him, and then he showed up at this panel discussion that you're talking about, he, the public defender, and stood up and asked the question, well, can you tell us what the book was now? Because he had authority from his client, and he explained who he was. And then right there, for the first time, publicly, I think you told them, or maybe I told them.
You did, yeah.
What the book was, and it was very dramatic. I think
it was, and it was so strange after holding it so tight.
Right.
And we were asked legitimately to give the information out publicly, and it felt to me like, no, I don't want to do that. But in fact, he did have permission. There was a letter, in fact, as I recall, from the client, his
Right.
client, giving permission. And so you were the one that put it out to the attendees who came to that Denver Press Club panel.
And remind us what the book was about.
Well, the book was actually about Japanese characters, the writing kinds of characters.
It was, I believe, about Japanese
calligraphy. Right, that's a better way of putting it.
It was the farthest thing from anything to do with methamphetamine.
Right. And then one might ask the question of, well, why didn't you just say that to begin with and save all this trouble? And you closed that panel session with the most eloquent response to that question about how important it is even when you have information that might not be germane to what was happening and could clear the air, that, well, you tell it.
Well, I don't know that it was eloquent then, and I don't know that I can do it eloquently now, but in essence, we together had said, and we had discussed this many times, if you always give law enforcement that evidence which is exculpatory, they will know that if we're not giving it, it's inculpatory,
Right.
and we don't want them to even know that much. So we just don't give them anything because book readers have an absolute privacy right.
Right.
And we respect it.
That's right. It was amazing.
It was.